Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about keeping your business growth focused as we enter a challenging economic period ahead. Before we get started, thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Coffee Consultants Mastermind Group, coached by me. We are starting a new group in July in 2 different time zones. If you're interested in registering, head to mapperforward.org/group coaching or check the show notes for that link and register today. So let's take a look at this topic right now. Keeping your business growth focused. Now, why are we talking about this today? In the previous few weeks of this podcast, I've been talking about inflation. I've been talking about commodity prices. I've been talking about why you should be thinking about securing your supply chain, etc., etc. All right. You've heard enough about that. We're starting to see the ramifications of all of those things starting to take place as we speak. I'm being contacted by a lot of people who said, oh my God, I'm starting to notice that the lumber prices are going up. But not only that, I've gone to my local hardware store and noticed that they actually don't have any lumber in stock. Or I heard you guys saying that the price of coffee is going to go up or that it's not going to be available, and I didn't really think it was going to be something that would happen for the next couple of months. But I called my green supplier and they're out of coffee. So it's happening. That's not what we're going to be talking about today, though. What we're going to be talking about is, now that it's happening, how do we remain growth focused? There are going to be 2 different camps when it comes to the end of whatever's going to happen with this financially. There are going to be people or businesses that don't survive this, and that's simply going to be devastating. There's no other way to put it. It's not anything other than devastating how much this is going to affect our industry, especially after 1/3 of all small businesses in our industry have shut down forever. That number is huge. And now what we're going to see is, under the strain of the economic ramifications of the stopgap measures that governments employed to get us through the pandemic, i.e. printing more money and, putting people on Social Security and all that stuff, which I think was helpful at the time, but we have to pay our dues for taking those stopgap measures. And now what we're seeing is that in some economies, those stopgap measures prevented inflation or collapses that were coming from a previous stopgap measure. Example, in the US, they hadn't really fully recovered from the 2008 collapse. The money that had been printed, ongoingly from then, wasn't recouped. The GDP didn't catch up. We didn't have enough debt being paid off to subsidize the money that had been printed. And so what ended up happening is we ended up in this crisis. They printed much more money, and now we're starting to see some ramifications of that. And it's already happening. We don't need to just talk about that anymore. If you want to hear more, there are plenty of episodes in the last couple of weeks. But how do we remain growth focused through this? That's the other side of things. Either businesses will collapse or businesses will boom. And this whole platform, Mapper Forward, is all created and focused around conspiring to each other's success. We are here to conspire to your success, and that means keeping you growth focused through very challenging times. We did it during the pandemic, and everyone who was in our mastermind groups, which is when the pandemic was when the mastermind groups were created, and everyone that went through them either sold their business for huge numbers or they remained growth focused during that period. Many of the people who were in our mastermind groups this time last year are still in our mastermind groups and getting ready to gear up for continuing to be growth focused through this next phase. How can you do that? First of all, you need to understand how to read your financial statements. There are previous episodes of understanding how to read your profit and loss statement, which is where you should absolutely start. Know how much you're spending on your COGS. Know how much you're spending on your operating expenses, both fixed and variable. Your operating expenses section of your profit and loss statement, particularly the variable expenses, is the first place you should be looking to cut costs if you need to as you move forward. Also, the next thing, having a very clear understanding of what your COGS are, so what your cost of goods sold are, and tracking how they're going up. Because it may be incremental if you're checking every week how much they're going up, but being able to track the effect on your profit margin in alignment with how much they're going up. You may not think it's such a big deal if every day or every week they're going up by 10 cents, but over the span of a month, something going up 10 cents depending on what it is every week for a month, a 40-cent increase may be huge based on the quantity of that product that you sell. So knowing your numbers is hugely important, and unfortunately in our industry most businesses don't. So knowing that is important. The other thing is, in a recent episode, we spoke about knowing how to solve your customers' problems, but knowing what problems your customers are having. This is going to be a really great way to remain growth focused over this challenging time that we're hitting. The next thing is your staffing. Knowing exactly how much staff you need to have and making sure that you are solving their needs as employees as much as they are solving your needs as an employer. So this exchange that existed, 10 years ago and previous to that, of someone gets a job and they get paid for the job, and that's the value exchange. They give you their labor, you pay them with fiat currency or money, as it's called by most of us. That value exchange used to be an acceptable notion, and anything else we could get in our industry was just a golden bonus. If you found an employer who knew how to treat their staff and knew how to communicate with their staff, it was huge, but it was very rare. Now it's a must-have. So if you want to remain growth focused through this, you've got to lock down what the company culture is, what your workplace culture is, and how you can make sure that you're meeting the value exchange required by each of your individual employees. And finally, make sure that you have a long-term strategy for pivot points. What I mean by that, what happens if things blow out beyond your expectations? What strategies do you have in order to remain proactive to any changes that show up? And how many of those scenarios have you worked through as an owner, as a team, and as a community, to make sure that you are ahead of those things before they show up? Now, there are absolutely going to be things that fall through the cracks, but if you have thought through as many as you can, problem-solving things that show up that you didn't anticipate will be much, much easier when they do show up, so that you're reacting to a few things rather than reacting to all of these things. We want you to have proactively anticipated many of the things that could happen from an economic perspective with regards to the constraints that we believe are coming. So, what happens if the price of your cost of goods sold goes double what it is today? 2 years ago, the C market was at 46 cents per pound, the lowest it's been in a long time. I think there's only once in history it's gone lower than that. Now the C market is at $1.64, and that's just over 2 years. So imagine if now the price goes double again what it is today, and you're buying coffee at somewhere around the $3.50 mark plus the differential of what that is. So if you're buying specialty coffee, there would be a differential for a bunch of different things on top of the base C price. What happens if all of that goes out of control expensive? How will your business adapt to that? Another thing, how will your business adapt to losing staff, people who don't want to work anymore? What happens if your lease increases in alignment with or over of inflation? And if that inflation goes to, let's say, double what was just recently reported. 2 weeks ago in the US, they reported 5% inflation, highest inflation rate since 2008. The market's response, nobody cared. What happens if your lease was to increase, if your rent was to increase 5%? How would that hurt your business? That will hurt your business. Now, what happens if that goes up double? So what happens if your rent increases by 10%? That means that if you have a $10,000 a month lease, you're going to have to find an extra $1,000 a month just to put on your rent. Most businesses can't afford that. How will you prepare for that? Will you decide to pivot to another location? Will you have a conversation with your landlord from now and say, hey, listen, we want to have a chat and see where your head's at with regards to what's happening with our lease? I know many businesses that are coming to the end of their lease at the moment in hospitality and just deciding it's not worth renewing, and they're closing their businesses. And we're going to continue to see this happening. If you are fortunate enough to keep your business and decide to continue to keep going, remaining growth focused is going to be at the core of what helps you survive. One small caveat here. Being growth focused is very different from being rah-rah positive. I hear a lot of people say, I'm just going to remain positive and hope for the best and just not focus on any of the negative stuff. And I would caution you here. I'm a big advocate for realism. And I'm the person who always expects everything to turn out the way that I've chosen it will turn out. But that doesn't come from being rah-rah positive. Being rah-rah positive is making a decision that I'm only going to look at one part of the situation. It means that you're totally discounting any of the challenges that are going to present themselves. And you will always be reacting to situations. When you see challenges show up, that doesn't mean that they're negative. It just means that they're challenges. If you are discounting and ignoring all of the negative stuff, or what I don't use terms like positive and negative. If you are looking at challenges that show up and decide that they are negative, you are not maintaining a growth-focused mindset. First of all, if you're ignoring them, you are absolutely not maintaining a growth-focused mindset. You are getting ready to be pinned under a whole world of hurt when the right thing comes and knocks, or the wrong thing, I should say, comes and knocks you off your seat. If you are aware of the challenges presenting themselves ahead of time, you are solving problems that you anticipate showing up, getting ready for them, and being able to be proactive in the way that you respond to them. That is very different from being focused on doom and gloom. The superpower in being a proactive leader is being able to assess situations before they show up, prepare the business and your team to deal with them should they eventuate, but also looking at scenarios and saying, this is highly unlikely to occur. And if it were to occur, I'm confident that my team has been through enough that we could pivot quickly. But the likelihood that this will occur is slim, and we're not going to prepare for it. These other things, however, there are indicators in the market or in our community or in the business that are showing us that we are likely to experience this form of challenge, whatever it is. And it is well worth preparing ourselves to be proactive for this if it does show up. So I hope this has been helpful. If we can ever help, consider hitting us up for some consulting or joining a mastermind group to be around a group of people that meets online to discuss these issues and really turn it into a growth-focused experience. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.